Hi, I'm Dave Myrtle, and this is where we talk to thought leaders around the seafood sector and key influencers in different functions around the world, all about reorienting market efforts towards the consumer and using those strategies to engage the consumer and power seafood consumption here in North America. And for today's episode, we're going to talk about data collection, data analysis, consumer insights. Super sexy stuff, I know, but it is sexy, and I'll tell you why. As you know, I created the brand Schooner Bay Salmon, probably the best salmon brand in North America, maybe the world. Of course, I'm a little biased, but it was a great brand. We won lots of awards, a Clio Award, a Marketer of the Year Award. We made lots of money for the owners and everybody in the value chain. But that only happened because we created a brand that really spoke to our customer and our consumer, and we delivered them a product that they found enormous value in. And before we did anything, we did research. We did packaging trials, we tested the name, and most importantly, we engaged our target audience with real in-depth interviews with top elite chefs around the country and just spent time digging around in their brain and understanding their motivations. And from that, we created Schooner Bay Salmon, and the rest is history. For today's conversation on data analysis and consumer insights, I talked to a real smart lady named Anne-Marie Roerink. She's the owner and president of 210 Analytics, and she's got lots of experience in different types of data collection, analysis, and consumer insights, and using that to engage the consumer and develop strategies to power business forward. And coincidentally, she also presented at last week's NFI conference and presented the seafood sector's performance in 2020, and it was dynamite stuff. Today's conversation with Anne-Marie was great. She gave us a lot of great insights and tips and thoughts on how we can use consumer insights to engage the consumer and really power our growth moving forward. I really enjoyed it, and I hope you do too. Today, for our conversation on data analysis and consumer insights, I'm really excited to have Anne-Marie Roerink, president and owner of 210 Analytics. Welcome, Anne-Marie.
Well, thanks so much for having me. This is fun.
So last week, you had the experience of presenting 2020 retail data for the seafood category to the NFI conference. How did that go?
Oh, that was great. I've been working in food retailing on the data side for many years, and a lot of categories like meat and produce, they get tons of attention, and there's a lot of data out there about the big categories. And for years, seafood was sort of the forgotten category, right? Where it was hard to even find total sales. And I think now that seafood is on fire for literally every retailer around the country, everybody is starting to discover the power of seafood. And it's really been very well received, just to show how big and how powerful seafood has become.
Well, and you nailed it right on the head. There hasn't been a lot of detailed data at retail or at any channel, for that matter, around the seafood category. So there must have been some positive reactions and responses to the people in the room just to be able to see data, not to mention that the data was very, very strong and positive for 2020.
Yeah, absolutely. The beauty of it was that we had an opportunity to look at seafood in all three temperature zones of the store. So ambient and canned, frozen, and fresh. And all three areas grew tremendously. But we also had an opportunity in working with IRI to look at how different those three shoppers really are. And so my big first lesson of today, I would say, is the fact that we should never just say the seafood shopper, but there should also be a little word in front of that, be it canned, be it frozen, be it fresh, because all three are very, very different, with really the only commonality being that all areas of the store grew tremendously fast.
And with that growth, so you were talking both volume growth and dollar growth, profit growth. So with that in mind, I mean, how did that compare to other categories, or at least other protein segments?
Really, seafood, whether frozen or fresh, has set about, I would say, about 30% above year-ago levels the rest of the year. And so when you look at the other proteins and really the whole rest of the store, it's just kind of that slow march back to normal as some people start to now ordering out or even eat out in restaurants more. We are so panicked anymore about having to have a lot of food in the house all the time. But seafood just continues to ride well above 2019 levels. And I think actually for 2021, that gives us a very strong outlook as well.
Wow. Would it be fair to say you're bullish on the future of seafood at retail?
Oh, absolutely. Really for many reasons. We know the biggest hurdle to buying seafood at retail was always well, I don't know how to cook it. And for proteins, the big hurdle is always the price point, right? Like a can of peas is cheap and everybody can heat it up, but a nice meat or a nice seafood, that's a little bit of a money spend. So a lot of people ate out seafood more than they prepared it at home. Well, fast forward to the pandemic, a lot of restaurants were closed around the country, or if you want to do takeout, seafood is not the best item for carrying out and having to drive home for 15 minutes. So a lot of people did start to experiment, and retailers were really smart too in coming up with all these cook in bag packaging, and or we'll fillet it for you however way you want. So there was a lot of value add happening at retail that kind of took that barrier of I don't know how to cook seafood down a little bit. And so the fact that not only seafood has that big health halo, but we have all these people who have now made seafood at home realize that, hey, I can actually do this. In fact, cooking seafood is actually pretty easy. In addition to, hey, it doesn't stink up my house, or I can put all the veggies in the bag with it, and I have a complete meal while I do the homework with the kids. So I think for many reasons, seafood absolutely a great outlook for 2021.
Well, and I really love that insight about this trend towards premium items, because the reality is other segments within the perimeter of the store, proteins, talk about beef, and you mentioned ribeye, and of course all these wonderful cuts, getting a prime rib and having a special meal at home with your family. I mean, so perhaps price isn't really always the barrier we should be concerned with. And in fact, seafood has such a premium halo or reputation that we really want to, as a sector, be able to take advantage of that reputation and attract those premium shoppers. So how do we do that in the seafood sector? What are some of the strategies we can do to really capture that premium shopper's attention?
Yeah. The health halo to me is something that we really need to talk about, because if you think about the regular meat category, it's really chicken that has that health halo. But within seafood, we have a beautiful health halo as well. But I think we have an opportunity to cut beyond that overall seafood is healthy. And I think we really have an opportunity to figure out a way to talk about that. Now, I know it's hard to make certain call outs on pack, but think about in-store signage, think about your websites, your apps, your social media. And that to me is another huge opportunity to sell and connect.
Behind all of these proteins are wonderful stories as well. Alaskan king crab, some of the most treacherous waters in the world. This person out on a salmon farm in this beautiful Pacific Northwest area, surrounded by nothing but nature, and really committing his or her life to staying out there and keeping his animals happy and healthy. A lot of good stories to be told. What are
I couldn't agree more.
doing to advantage that? Are you seeing that in other proteins in terms of developing brand stories and really connecting with the consumers, or is it more blocking and tackling?
No, I think you have a massive point there. And I think one of the categories to look at that does it decently well is grass-fed beef. Oftentimes grass-fed beef comes from smaller family farms. And so they really lead with that farm forward. So when you ask a consumer about livestock, about a cow, they I always call it the Heidi in the Alps effect, right? They think of the cow, preferably the mountain background, bell around their neck. That's the image that they have of livestock. And so it's really the grass-fed beef guys that bring that image home. And so they love showing the cowboy on the horse and, with the cattle in nice lush green fields. And they do that exceedingly well. And then, of course, part of the industry that sometimes gets dinged for it is more the chicken side. But I think you're absolutely right in that seafood has some beautiful imagery that we could be sharing and just talking about. And again, If you think about the huge upsurge in the sales that happened through e-commerce, with some of the numbers that are in that deck as well, e-commerce provides us so many opportunities to link to all sorts of things that are important to the consumer. So think about the fact that online you can very easily link to recipes. You can very easily link to that transparency story and the origin story. You can link to your own website, whatever it might be. And so I think I realize in store unpack we're limited, especially on the fresh side where we may not have any opportunity, but at the very least, I think let's use all our social media, our websites, and everything else that we can to tell the story. I think you're absolutely right on that.
And interesting within your findings that e-commerce continued to be a driver as well. You've been seeing this sort of constant upward trajectory over the past few years, and obviously in 2020 it absolutely exploded. So in those that can unlock the secret, I think have a really powerful future because it really it's a one-stop shop. It allows you to tell a great story. It allows you to build a relationship with a consumer, get some data and insights on what motivates that consumer. You can share your messaging and you can actually sell the product. Not only that, but you're forced to create innovative packaging that's going to stand up to the cold chain when you're selling to someone via e-commerce. Does the retailer see e-commerce as a threat?
Do not, to an extent. One of the guys on the panel with me was from Albertsons. He talked about the fact that fresh seafood was up 800%. Now what we're seeing is not only did people jump massively to ordering online, but they also jumped right into ordering fresh online. And I think you make a really good point about the opportunity in that for retailers with the fact that frozen is easy to buy online, right? Anybody can grab it out of the frozen case and off you go. But in fresh, that's really where you see huge variety among the different retailers. And so this whole idea of ordering fresh online, that's where we still have a lot of opportunity in retail. But in general, the vast amount of e-com dollars are now flowing through click and collect. So retailers are getting a massive amount of that pie.
I'm interested in frozen. There's this perception that frozen is not as good, frozen is not as high quality, certainly frozen seafood. I mean, can you talk about what has the perception been among consumers for frozen? Because obviously frozen, really it seemed that frozen actually led the way during the 2020 pandemic.
Yeah, it did. So frozen seafood was the exact same size as fresh. Whereas in meat, it's like this giant and this tiny. And so then what happened during the pandemic, and IRI had a really cool term for it, and they called it consumer mobility. And what they meant by that is just as consumers, how much are we moving around? So going to school, going to work, going to see family, eating out, traveling, what have you. And the less consumer mobility, they realized the more people focus on shelf life. And so if you look during those weeks where we were all in shelter in place, what did extremely well was all things frozen, canned, what have you. If you look in the frozen food aisle, the number one category associated with low mobility is actually frozen seafood. And so what we saw happening during the pandemic is that it was actually frozen that jumped ahead of fresh and outgrew it and is now the biggest part within seafood.
Among the producer community is really this reluctance to apply resources to all of what I think are the important things, personnel dedicated to consumer marketing, embracing interesting, innovative packaging, new product development, e-commerce, social media, really the critical strategies and activities around building a consumer relationship and consumer brands. And one of those things that I also see producers shy away from is actually embracing data and investing behind data. So tell me, how important do you think it is among that sort of suite of tactics and activities? How important is collecting data, getting insights, and using that data to drive your strategies in this sector?
Well, that's a dangerous question to ask of a researcher. But no, in my world, facts are friendly, right? And so like one of the things that we looked at in the deck was who is the frozen seafood consumer? Who is the fresh seafood consumer? And that then allows you to have strategies in the consumer marketing. But the more you know about your consumer, the more targeted you can be in how you word things, or the people that you show, or the types of meals that people might combine with. For instance, in my world, the more you know about your product relative to total seafood, relative to total store, what else are the natural alliances that people tend to make with seafood. I think the more you know, the better.
Well, and furthermore, I think you really identified, really important first and foremost is to know your customer and know the consumer and what motivates that person. I know when I started my brand, Schooner Bay Salmon, we relied heavily on research to drive our strategies. And, we did packaging trials, we tested the name with consumer panel, obviously a lot of in-market observation, but probably the most valuable research set that we did was we did these 20 really in-depth, detailed interviews with great chefs around the country. And we just dug around in their brain, we mined their thoughts and opinions, and really wanted to know what their motivations were, what drove them. And that was incredibly powerful in pointing us down the road to where we ended up with Schooner Bay Salmon, and really drove a lot of what became the brand. You talked quite a bit about the quantitative side. What role does qualitative research play in this whole equation?
Oh, I like you, I'm a big fan of focus groups, of shop-alongs, or interviews, because the numbers tell you one thing, and the numbers tell you how often people buy it, why they buy it, and you can come up with all sorts of research questions, but it's very, very hard to truly understand the emotion behind something, right? And I think seafood has a lot of emotion in it. And so to really talk to people one-on-one, and there's, again, many ways of doing this these days with internet, just like we are talking back and forth on Zoom. You can talk to consumers all across the country. You pay them $100 and you pick their brain for half an hour. Shop-alongs, like, what catches people's eye when they're in the frozen aisle or when they're in the fresh. And so, yes, I'm a big believer of qualitative. It really helps you to kind of dot those I's and cross the T's, and really get into how people interact with seafood.
So, Anne-Marie, you have, say, a couple minutes to talk to a seafood producer and tell them, what you want to tell them or talk to them about from a data analysis and consumer insights perspective. What's important for them to know?
I thought one of the most interesting sets of the slides in the deck were about cross-purchasing, and the fact that it kind of all starts with salmon. Salmon has a very high household penetration, but then we looked at what we called cross-purchasing, and the ability to kind of use that door that salmon has opened to then buy across other different species, and to really leverage that power of salmon, shrimp, and there were some others as well. So more than anything, from an individual producer perspective, know more than just your own numbers. Know how your numbers and your performance stacks up against others. Know who your consumer is. Talk to people and how they prepare it, because that will allow you to come up with some very cool recipes, or it really allows you to understand what the friction points are, right? There's many different things, and I am, of course I am a researcher, so I'm going to advocate for data, but I absolutely believe facts are friendly, and the more we know, whether it's heart numbers or really that psyche of the consumer, the better we are as an industry.
Well, and I hope you do continue to really pound the drum on data collection and analysis and consumer insights, because absolutely it can really unlock, I think, the future of this sector. And it really is a powerful tool that must not be overlooked. It really should be the first thing that a producer is doing before they embark on their consumer strategies. Anne-Marie, I really want to thank you for your time today. Really interesting conversation. I could talk to you all day about data collection, analysis, consumer insights, and just a lot of roads we could go down, but you've got a job to get to. I do as well. I really want to thank you, Anne-Marie Roerink, President and owner of 210 Analytics, with a great episode on data collection and consumer insights. Thanks, Anne-Marie.
Well, thanks, Dave. It was wonderful to be on your show.